So we're going to talk about the lecture 185 today as a basis for our discussions. It's titled Mutuality, a Cosmic Law. And then with that as a basis, okay, let me let in one more person here. With that as a basis, we will talk more about relationships. Hello, Sasha. Welcome. We're just getting started. All right, so I will begin by sharing a few points from PowerPoint here on the lecture. And just reminding anyone who joined us recently that we are recording, and we will ask that you hold any questions until the presentation is finished and we go into our Q&A. At that point, I'll stop the recording, so whatever a person shares is confidential within the group. And we'll get started here. Okay. So the lecture begins by, good, we've got one more person coming. The lecture begins with talking about this principle of mutuality. And the guide describes it as a cosmic and or spiritual law. And so it's a very fundamental aspect of our lives in this world. So I'm going to read a few quotes from the lecture that specifically describe this spiritual law of mutuality. It says, "No creation can take place until mutuality exists." Mutuality means two superficially different aspects move towards one another for the purpose of uniting and making one comprehensive whole. So this idea of two superficially different things, two different people, two different energies needing to come together as a united experience. And this is what makes this principle of mutuality possible. And we'll also find that's what makes a new creation possible. So the lecture goes on to say these different aspects move towards one another, they cooperate and affect one another. And by doing this, they create a new divine manifestation. So this idea of two different things coming together, as long as they come together with cooperation and allow an exchange between one another, they actually create a third thing, this new manifestation. So new forms of self-expression can only come into being when the self merges with something beyond itself. This is a very key point here, because the idea is that we're moving beyond our individuality and joining with another so that something new can come into being. The lecture goes on to say that mutuality is the movement that bridges the gap from duality to unity. Wherever there is separation, mutuality must prevail or come into being to eliminate this separation. So if we want to come out of the separate state, or kind of separate ego-centric state of being, we need to utilize the principle of mutuality in order to move beyond ourselves into a more connected state with another person or an organization or an activity. So finally, the lecture says, whether you make something, whether you compose a symphony, paint a picture, write a novel, cook a meal, search for new scientific discoveries, heal illnesses, create mutual love, develop on the path of self-realization. This law of mutuality applies to everything, all successful completion and meaningful self-expression. So that's pretty comprehensive. Mutuality is something that we use whenever we are creating or joining with another for some mutually shared goal. So let's bring this into focus a little more about mutuality in human relationships. The lecture says that there are two aspects or two steps to mutuality. And this applies to any activity, but it does, in fact, also apply specifically to human relationships. And so when two humans come together, there is the creative aspect where imagination and expansion are required to bring these two people together. And excuse me, in order to exchange ideas, explore new possibilities. And so this is what we call kind of the Eros stage. And this can be in any group or any two people. It doesn't have to be specifically romantic relationships, but it certainly applies with romantic relationships. And so there has to be some kind of excitement, some curiosity, some interest in joining together with another person or a group of people in order to create something new. So this is where imagination comes into play, the ability to kind of envision new possibilities, open oneself up to a field of possibilities that is beyond what is available to just one individual. And then the second step is what the lecture calls the work aspect. And this is where we actually bring our willpower into play to actualize the ideas, the plans, the possibilities. So first we have to imagine something that we want, and then we need to work at it to bring it into manifestation or into being. So in particular, with regard to human relationships, there is the working through of challenges, distortions, misunderstandings, and expectations of either our partner or a group of people that we are wanting to connect with. We have to have an openness, a willingness on the basis of goodwill to explore where some of our own ideas and limitations might be limiting our ability to connect with another person. And so we know from the pathwork that we can have these misunderstandings about other people, about the world, about our partners. And it doesn't mean that they're true, but unless we investigate them and sort of bring them into our awareness and kind of test them, they're going to be operating in the background. That's a key principle of the pathwork. Whatever is not truly conscious within us is still operating in the background. It's just we're not really going to know how it is affecting our experience. So, in this working aspect of a relationship, the lecturer says that an immature relationship treats the partnership as a separate entity over which they have no control. So perhaps you've experienced this. Once you're in a relationship, there's some uncomfortable dynamics, there's maybe some friction, and we might kind of have this sense that the relationship is moving forward with its own momentum, and we seem to have no way to influence our behavior, our responses, what the other person is bringing. And from the pathwork, we know that that's not really true. What's necessary is simply to come into dialogue, talk about what we're feeling, what we're experiencing, and have the openness to consider whether what we're feeling and experiencing is shared by the other person, or whether it's something that is entirely within us that is not really accurate. So this idea of that a relationship might have its own momentum that we have no control over arises from an unwillingness of the partners to work through their own inner conflicts and negativity. So once again, the principle of bringing what's inside of us that is in kind of a hazy state or a subconscious state, bringing it to our conscious awareness, really noticing how we're reacting in our relationships, and asking ourselves, okay, am I feeling afraid? Am I feeling hurt? Am I feeling discouraged? I wonder why that is, and sort of follow the threads of our initial reactions into deeper levels of our subconscious. Okay, so going on here, there's some other quotes from the lecture that are very, I think, insightful. So, the creative, spontaneous, effortless experience that initially brings two people together in attraction and love occurs all the time, and yet this connection is rarely maintained. And this is, we know from the pathwork, this is what the guide describes as the Eros force. And there's a whole lecture on love, Eros, and sex, which goes into much greater detail about Eros. But essentially, it is this force of kind of initial attraction that brings us into relationship with another person or another group that we feel affinity with. And at the beginning, everything seems wonderful. It's like we are our best selves. We're kind of floating in this bliss of mutual exchange that seems so effortless and so fulfilling. And yet that initial phase of Eros doesn't last forever. We need to learn how to perpetuate it. And in short, the way to do that is through this kind of working aspect of mutuality, where we do work within ourselves to explore our misconceptions and our own negativity. And we also need a willingness to work with our partners to talk about what we're experiencing and share our feelings, share our needs. This is all part of the kind of communication that's really needed, kind of a self-revealing of things that we might initially be reluctant to share to another person. This is all part of keeping this Eros energy alive. So it goes on, the lecture goes on to say all sorts of explanations are given for this phenomenon of Eros not lasting. Yet what mostly happens is that the labor of working out the inner and outer dissensions is neglected. So we neglect doing our inner work, our inner exploration, our kind of examining and purifying our own beliefs. And also there is the outer aspect, which is we need to communicate with our partners and share the depths of our being, maybe our fears, our insecurities, our assumptions, our judgments, and in the spirit of simply checking these things out with our partner without believing that they're necessarily true, we get to test these assumptions that we have. So the childish idea prevails that once the initial act has taken place, this sort of connection through mutuality, that the self is powerless to determine the course of the relationship. Usually the relationship is treated as though it were a separate entity, either favorably or unfavorably, that runs its own course. And so that's similar to the previous quote, is that once we're in the vehicle of relationship, there seems to be no way to guide it. It's sort of we're kind of going forward, and there's no way to affect it. And that's absolutely not the case, the lecture says. All right, so let's talk about a few obstacles to mutuality. So mutuality only exists to the degree that we are aware of our own negativity, our selfishness, and our own indifference. And this is kind of the inner aspect of the work of mutuality, is we need to explore where we might be selfish, where we might have unrealistic expectations, where we might have indifference about the pain of the other, our partner or the group or whatever. Mutuality, it says, is not absent because of the existence of this inner negativity, only because it is not made conscious. And so, once again, this is a fundamental Pathwork principle. If inner negativity is within us and it's not conscious, then it tends to operate in the background and affect our relationships. It sort of comes out sideways in, cynicism or judgments or harsh remarks, criticism. And what we want to do is we want to interrupt that cycle. And the way to interrupt it is to simply make this material conscious. We don't have to be perfect to have mutuality. We just need to be conscious of our inner conflicts. If you are unaware of your inner negativity, you will act out these tendencies with another person. It's a kind of a part of the divine law, in a sense, that whatever is hidden, we will project out onto the other person. And the way to interrupt that cycle is to make this material conscious. Now, also, there is an assumption that's built in here, and that is that we have enough of a healthy ego that when these feelings arise within us, we can decide whether we act on them or not. We can decide whether we share them or not. And so, if there's a lot of negative energy that if we shared it would perhaps be hurtful, we need to do our own work first before we engage in the relationship. And so the healthy adult ego plays a very important role in the relationship. We're not really suggesting that you should blurt out every negative thing within you to your partner, unedited, unexamined, because this is not healthy for a relationship. Having judgments about your partner, whether they are spoken or unspoken, is a sign that more inner work is needed. Kind of obvious, but that's, once again, an essential part of establishing and maintaining mutuality. Okay. All right. So that is kind of a brief capitulation of the lecture. And so now we're going to go into an exercise, and I'm going to stop sharing at this point, and then we can ask some questions about the lecture before we go into the exercise. All right, we would like to try the exercise, I hope. And what we'll do is, let me share my screen again just so we can kind of refresh ourselves. So we're going to go into breakout rooms, 2 people in a room. And what I'm offering as a suggestion is to think of a current relationship or a past relationship. It doesn't have to be romantic. It can be with your parents. It can be with a sibling. It can be with a coworker. It can be with a boss. Or it can be in a romantic relationship. So think a little bit about it and see if you can recall what the friction points were. What were the places in the relationship that seemed to arise again and again, whether it was taking out the trash, arguments about who's doing the dishes, or anything else. But usually within a relationship, if you've been together for a while, there will be points of friction that seem to recur, and those are always good places to start, because it means there's going to be, subconscious things within usually both partners that are causing this to reoccur. So once you can locate some friction points, ask yourself, how did I react to these friction points? Did I go into defense? Did I go into blame? Did I make excuses about myself? Or did I own my role in the situation? And then just share with your partner. So we're going to take a total of roughly 18 minutes. I'll be keeping the time. Give yourself a minute or two when we get you in the group or in the breakout room. Introduce yourself. Say anything you'd like to say about where you might be from, etc. And then we'll roughly, I'll let you do that timing of just sharing about your experience of a relationship. And there's enough time for 7 minutes of sharing for each person. I will be giving you a heads up with about 60 seconds before we come back into the group. That'll give you enough time to kind of finish your sentence or, close the discussion. And then we'll come back into the group and we'll have some time for sharing if anybody would like to share what they learned about themselves. And that's always helpful. So let me go back here and let's go into breakout rooms. Thank you for joining us, and if you'd like more information, please go to www.pathworkcalifornia.org.